Old Hollywood movie endings that pissed audiences off. Spoiler alert, you've just sat through 2 hours of cinema, the plot's building to its climax, the music swells, and then that happens? Today, we're diving into the most shocking, controversial, and downright infuriating endings from Hollywood's golden age. These aren't just twist endings, they're the finales that had audiences storming out of theaters, demanding refunds, and writing angry letters to studio heads. Some of these films are now considered classics, but when they first premiered, their endings sparked outrage, unlike anything we've seen in modern cinema. And number 7, that ending was so controversial it almost destroyed the director's career completely. But why did these endings provoke such extreme reactions? Was it moral outrage in a more conservative era, storytelling that was too far ahead of its time, or something deeper, a violation of the unwritten contract between filmmakers and their audiences about how stories should end? Stay with me, because by understanding these controversial endings, you'll see how they secretly shaped everything you watch today, including the strict Hollywood formulas that still control most blockbusters. For 1. Casablanca, 1942, the sacrifice no one expected.
Better hurry, you'll miss that plane.
Today, Casablanca is revered as one of the greatest films ever made, with an ending so iconic it's been referenced and parodied countless times. But when audiences first witnessed Rick Blaine sending Ilsa away with her husband in 1942, the reaction was anything but positive. Warner Brothers had marketed Casablanca as a straightforward wartime romance, starring Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman. The studio's promotional materials heavily implied that the star-crossed lovers would end up together, with taglines promising, "Their love will make you weep." Theater managers reported confused and angry patrons demanding refunds after Rick's famous line, "We'll always have Paris," sent Ilsa away with Victor Laszlo. What audiences didn't know was that the film's ending was uncertain right up until filming. The screenplay wasn't finished when shooting began, and even the actors didn't know who Ilsa would end up with. Bergman famously complained that she didn't know how to play her scenes because she didn't know which man she was supposed to be in love with. The ending we now celebrate was considered commercially risky in 1942. Studio executives worried that American audiences, used to happily ever after conclusions, would reject Rick's self-sacrifice. They nearly forced director Michael Curtis to shoot an alternative ending where Rick and Ilsa somehow escape together. One theater owner in Minneapolis reported that several couples walked out during the airport scene, with one woman loudly declaring, "That's not how love stories are supposed to end." Some audience members even accused the film of promoting un-American values by suggesting that fighting fascism was more important than personal happiness. What's most fascinating is how completely public opinion shifted. Within a decade, Casablanca was being celebrated precisely for the ending that initially alienated viewers. The finale that once had audiences feeling cheated is now considered the only possible conclusion to the story. As Roger Ebert later wrote, Casablanca's ending worked because it valued something larger than romance. It valued doing the right thing. Number 2. The Seventh Seal, 1957. Death always wins.
Vänta ett ögonblick. Så säger ni alla. Men jag lämnar inga uppskov. Du spelar ju schack, inte sant?
When Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal premiered in America, it was one of the first foreign art films to receive wide distribution in the United States. Mainstream audiences, expecting something similar to the Hollywood fare they were accustomed to, were utterly unprepared for what they witnessed. The film follows a medieval knight returning from the Crusades who plays a chess game with death while seeking answers about life, faith, and mortality. Throughout the film, the knight manages to delay his fate through clever chess moves, giving viewers hope that perhaps he might find a loophole or outsmart death entirely. But the ending offers no such comfort. In the final scene, death claims not only the knight, but also most of the other main characters, leading them in the now famous Dance of Death across a hillside. The only survivors are a small family of actors who escape while death is distracted. American audiences in the 1950s, still in the afterglow of post-war optimism and accustomed to Hollywood's life-affirming conclusions, were outraged. One New York theater reported that approximately one-third of the audience walked out during the final scene. The manager recalled an elderly woman smacking him with her handbag, accusing him of showing such godless filth. Critics were similarly divided. Some dismissed the film as European pessimism, while others recognized it as a masterpiece. The Catholic Legion of Decency gave the film a condemned rating, claiming its ending promotes despair and denies divine mercy. What these initial reactions missed was that Bergman wasn't simply delivering a nihilistic message. The family who escapes death's dance represents hope. The idea that while death comes for us all, art, love, and innocence may temporarily transcend mortality. Over time, audience perception shifted dramatically. The very ending that had provoked walkouts became one of cinema's most analyzed and celebrated conclusions. Film scholars now point to The Seventh Seal as the moment when American audiences began to accept that movies could end on philosophically complex notes rather than simplistic moral victories. Number 3. Sorry, Wrong Number, 1948. The murder call that came true.
What was that? What was what, madam? That click just now on my telephone.
Barbara Stanwyck stars as Leona Stevenson, a wealthy, bedridden woman who accidentally overhears a telephone conversation about a murder plot. As the film progresses, she gradually realizes the intended victim is herself, and her own husband has arranged her murder to collect her inheritance. The final scenes show Leona desperately trying to get help as her killer enters the house. She makes one final phone call to her husband, who listens to her murder over the telephone line. The screen goes black as we hear her final scream. This ending violated one of Hollywood's most sacred unwritten rules from the production code era. Villains must be punished, and innocent victims, especially women, must be saved. Audiences who had spent the entire film hoping for Leona's rescue were left shocked and disturbed. Theater managers reported angry confrontations with patrons demanding refunds. In Cleveland, a group of women organized a protest outside a theater, claiming the film was sadistic entertainment that destroys faith in humanity. Several newspapers printed editorials questioning whether such a dark ending was appropriate entertainment. What makes this case particularly interesting is that Sorry, Wrong Number was based on a popular radio play that featured the same ending. Somehow, listeners found the audio version less objectionable than seeing the murder implied on screen. As film historian Jeanine Bassinger noted, the radio play left room for imagination. The film made the horror inescapable. Despite the initial outrage, the film was financially successful, and Stanwyck received an Oscar nomination for her performance. The ending that so disturbed 1948 audiences has since been recognized as one of film noir's most powerful conclusions, precisely because it denied viewers the comfort of justice or rescue. Modern viewers watching Sorry, Wrong Number might find it hard to understand why the ending was considered so shocking, but in post-war America, a film that suggested evil could triumph so completely over innocence violated deeply held cultural beliefs about moral order. The final moments weren't just frightening. For many 1940s viewers, they were almost sacrilegious. Number 4. The Great Dictator, 1940, Charlie Chaplin's sermon.
Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
Charlie Chaplin was the world's most beloved silent comedian, famous for his little tramp character and physical comedy. So when he released The Great Dictator, his first true talking picture and a bold satire of Adolf Hitler, audiences expected political humor wrapped in Chaplin's signature comedic style. For most of the film, that's exactly what they got. Chaplin plays dual roles, a Jewish barber and a Hitler-like dictator named Adenoid Hinkle. Through mistaken identity, the barber is eventually mistaken for the dictator and asked to give a victory speech. What happens next shocked audiences completely. Instead of continuing the comedy, Chaplin steps entirely out of character and delivers a deadly serious 6-minute monologue directly to the camera, pleading for peace, tolerance, and humanity. The speech explicitly condemns fascism, dictatorship, and anti-Semitism while advocating for democracy and universal brotherhood. This abrupt tonal shift at the film's conclusion left 1940 audiences bewildered and divided. Many felt betrayed by the sudden abandonment of comedy for overt political messaging. Theater owners reported uncomfortable silences and scattered boos when the lights came up. The controversy wasn't just about the speech's content, though in pre-war America, Chaplin's strong anti-fascist stance was considered politically divisive. The greater offense to viewers was the breaking of the fourth wall, the sense that Chaplin had stopped entertaining them to deliver a lecture. Major newspapers published letters from disappointed fans. One widely reprinted letter complained, "I paid to see Charlie Chaplin make me laugh, not preach politics at me." The New York Times noted the audible restlessness of the premiere audience during the final speech. What's remarkable is how completely historical context has transformed perceptions of this ending. What struck many 1940 viewers as heavy-handed sermonizing is now considered one of cinema's most courageous moments. The very speech that had audiences shifting uncomfortably in their seats has been excerpted in documentaries, quoted by world leaders, and even set to music in viral videos. As film critic Roger Ebert later observed, the ending of The Great Dictator wasn't a failure of artistic judgment. It was Chaplin deciding that some messages were too important for subtlety. Number 5. They shoot horses, don't they? 1969. The dance marathon that ends in death.
Now.
Sidney Pollack's devastating drama follows a group of desperate contestants in a Depression-era dance marathon. For weeks, they dance nearly non-stop, taking 10-minute breaks every 2 hours, all hoping to win the cash prize. The film focuses particularly on Gloria, Jane Fonda, a bitter, disillusioned woman who sees no future for herself. After enduring grueling physical and psychological torture, Gloria finally discovers that the marathon is rigged. The winners have been predetermined, and even they will receive far less money than promised after various expenses are deducted. In the final scene, Gloria asks her dance partner Rocky, Michael Sarrazin, to shoot her because she can't bring herself to commit suicide. He complies and is arrested immediately afterward. When asked by a policeman why he did it, he replies with the film's title, "They shoot horses, don't they?" When the film premiered, audiences were stunned by its relentlessly bleak vision. The dance marathon serves as an obvious metaphor for the pointless suffering of life, and Gloria's suicide suggests that death is the only real escape. This nihilistic message, combined with the film's deliberate pacing that forces viewers to experience the contestants' exhaustion, created a viewing experience many found intolerable. One theater manager recalled that more people walked out during the final 15 minutes of They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Than any other film he had shown. Warner Brothers received hundreds of letters complaining about the ending, with many accusing the studio of promoting suicide and hopelessness. The backlash was particularly strong in smaller communities. In Peoria, Illinois, a local church organized a boycott of the theater showing the film, claiming it glorifies self-destruction and denies the value of perseverance. Several newspapers published editorials questioning whether such a dark film served any social purpose beyond shock value. What critics and many audience members failed to recognize was that the film was an intentional subversion of Hollywood conventions, a direct challenge to the persistent American myth that hard work and determination inevitably lead to success. By denying viewers any hint of redemption or hope, Pollack forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about exploitation and futility. Despite the controversy, or perhaps because of it, They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Was nominated for 9 Academy Awards. Jane Fonda's performance as Gloria earned particular praise, and the film is now recognized as a landmark of American cinema precisely because of its uncompromising ending. Number 6. Vertigo, 1958. The hero who fails completely. When Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo was released in 1958, it was a commercial and critical disappointment. Audiences accustomed to Hitchcock's more straightforward thrillers were baffled and angered by this strange, dreamlike film about obsession, identity, and manipulation. The film follows Scotty Ferguson, James Stewart, a detective with a fear of heights who becomes obsessed with a woman named Madeline, Kim Novak. After failing to prevent her apparent suicide due to his vertigo, he later meets Judy, a woman who resembles Madeline. He then forces her to transform her appearance to look exactly like the dead woman, not realizing that Judy actually is Madeline, or rather, was impersonating Madeline as part of an elaborate murder plot. When Scotty finally discovers the truth, he takes Judy Madeline to the scene of the original crime, a church bell tower. In the film's final moments, Judy accidentally falls to her death, leaving Scotty standing alone at the tower power's edge, his vertigo apparently cured, but his soul destroyed. This ending violated virtually every Hollywood convention of the era. The hero doesn't save anyone, doesn't bring the true villain to justice, and doesn't experience any kind of redemption. Instead, he's revealed as a deeply flawed man whose obsession makes him complicit in Judy's destruction. Preview audiences were openly hostile to the ending. According to Hitchcock's assistant, people actually shouted at the screen during the final scene. One comment card from a test screening read, "What kind of sick mind would create such a twisted ending?" Paramount executives pressured Hitchcock to change the conclusion, suggesting alternatives where Judy lives or where the true murderer, who never appears on screen in the final cut, is apprehended. Hitchcock refused, resulting in minimal studio support for the film's release. Critical reception was equally harsh. The New Yorker called the ending far-fetched nonsense, while Time magazine described it as drivel that never really makes sense. Many reviewers specifically complained about the unsatisfying conclusion. What audiences and critics in 1958 couldn't see was that Hitchcock had created something revolutionary, a film whose disturbing ending was precisely the point. The very elements that viewers rejected, the hero's moral failure, the lack of justice, the sense of inevitable doom, are what later generations would celebrate as Vertigo, gradually came to be recognized as Hitchcock's masterpiece and one of the greatest films ever made. Number 7. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, 1920. The twist that almost ruined a director. Robert Wiener's German expressionist masterpiece tells the story of a mysterious hypnotist, Dr. Caligari, who uses a sleepwalker named Cesare to commit murders. The film's protagonist, Francis, investigates these crimes and eventually exposes Caligari as the director of a mental asylum who has gone mad himself. But then comes the film's infamous twist. The entire narrative is revealed to be the delusion of Francis, who is actually a patient in the asylum. Dr. Caligari is really his kind and concerned doctor. This revelation completely inverts the film's meaning, suggesting that authority figures are benevolent rather than corrupt. What most viewers don't know is that this twist ending wasn't in the original screenplay. Writers Hans Janowitz and Karl Mayer intended Caligari as a revolutionary statement about the madness of authority in post-World War I Germany. In their version, Caligari remains the villain, a symbol of the state's power to manipulate citizens into committing atrocities. Producer Eric Palmer and director Robert Wiener added the frame story that transforms the narrative into a madman's fantasy, effectively neutralizing the film's political message. When the writers saw the finished film, they were horrified by this betrayal of their vision. The twist ending provoked outrage from German avant-garde audiences who understood the political implications of this change. The left-wing press accused Wiener of cowardice and selling out to commercial interests. One Berlin newspaper called it a reactionary trick that undermines what could have been a revolutionary masterpiece. The controversy nearly destroyed Wiener's career in Germany's artistic community. Several prominent expressionist actors refused to work with him after Caligari, believing he had compromised his artistic integrity. The backlash was so severe that Wiener felt compelled to publicly defend his decision, claiming the frame story added psychological complexity rather than political reversal. Ironically, American audiences who saw the film during its U.S. release were largely unaware of this controversy. Unfamiliar with the political context, they focused instead on the film's visual style and horror elements, generally accepting the twist as a creative choice rather than ideological retreat. Film scholar Siegfried Krakauer later argued in his influential book, From Caligari to Hitler, that the changed ending of Caligari prefigured Germany's eventual submission to authoritarianism. While this interpretation may be overreaching, it demonstrates how seriously the film's ending was taken in its native context. Today, the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is studied as both a cinematic landmark and a fascinating case study in how a film's ending can completely transform its meaning, sometimes against the original creator's intentions. Number 8. The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, 1948. All That Gold for Nothing. John Huston's classic follows three Americans searching for gold in the Mexican mountains. After finding a substantial deposit, they successfully mine it despite numerous hardships and conflicts. But just as they're preparing to transport their treasure home, bandits attack. During the chaos, their carefully collected gold dust is blown away by the wind, rendering their entire expedition worthless. In the final scene, the surviving protagonists Dobbs, Humphrey Bogart, and Curtin Tim Holt collapse in hysterical laughter at the absurdity of their situation, eventually deciding to return to civilization empty-handed but wiser. This conclusion violated one of Hollywood's most reliable formulas, the adventure story where perseverance leads to reward. Audiences who had endured the characters' struggles for 2 hours expected at least some of them to enjoy the fruits of their labor. Instead, Huston offered a philosophical punchline about the meaninglessness of material wealth. The preview screenings were disastrous. Warner Brothers executives reported that audience comment cards contained more profanity than they had ever seen. One often quoted card simply read, "Are you kidding me? That's it?" Theater managers noted that patrons seemed particularly angry because they had invested emotionally in the character's quest, only to have their investment rendered pointless. Jack Warner himself reportedly demanded that Huston shoot an alternative ending where at least some of the gold is saved. Huston refused, insisting that the loss of the gold was essential to the film's message about greed and human nature. The standoff nearly resulted in Huston being removed from the project during post-production. Critics were initially divided on the ending. While some praised its philosophical depth, others dismissed it as unnecessarily cruel to both characters and audience. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times called it a cynical joke played on faithful viewers, while acknowledging its thematic consistency. What's particularly interesting about The Treasure of the Sierra Madre is how quickly audience perception changed. Within a decade of its release, the very ending that had provoked such outrage was being taught in film schools as a perfect example of thematic resolution. The film is now considered one of the greatest American movies ever made, with its ironic conclusion recognized as its crowning achievement. As Huston himself later remarked, "Sometimes you have to disappoint the audience to tell the truth." Number 9, Gone with the Wind, 1939. Frankly, my dear...
Where shall I go? What shall I do?
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
It's the highest-grossing film of all time when adjusted for inflation, the winner of 10 Academy Awards, and one of the most beloved movies in American history. Yet when Gone with the Wind was first screened, its ending provoked an unprecedented wave of audience anger. After nearly 4 hours of following Scarlett O'Hara's tumultuous life through the Civil War and Reconstruction, viewers watch her finally realize she loves Rhett Butler, only to have him walk out on her with the immortal line, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." Though Scarlett vows to win him back, the film ends with their separation unresolved. This conclusion violated the most basic expectation of the Hollywood romance, that love would triumph in the end. Audience members who had invested emotionally in Scarlett and Rhett's relationship felt cheated by the ambiguous finale. Producer David O. Selznick received thousands of letters from outraged fans demanding to know what happened next. Some accused him of deliberately creating an unsatisfying ending to sell tickets to a sequel. Others claimed they felt physically ill when the credits rolled. One often cited letter from a woman in Atlanta stated, "I have seen your picture 3 times, and I still cannot accept that ending. You must tell us what becomes of Scarlett and Rhett." Theater managers reported that some viewers actually returned to the box office demanding partial refunds, arguing that they had paid for a complete story but received an unfinished one. Several newspapers printed alternate endings written by fans, some running to dozens of pages. The controversy over the ending even extended to the production team. Selznick considered several alternative conclusions, including a more definitive reconciliation between the leads. Author Margaret Mitchell, however, insisted that the ambiguous ending was essential to Scarlett's character arc, and Selznick ultimately agreed. What's fascinating is that this once controversial ending is now considered one of cinema's most perfect conclusions. The very ambiguity that frustrated 1939 audiences is now celebrated as emotionally honest and thematically appropriate. As film historian Molly Haskell observed, the ending worked because it denied viewers the easy satisfaction they wanted while giving them the ending the story demanded. it. Today's viewers, more accustomed to ambiguous or unhappy endings, might find it difficult to understand why Gone with the Wind's conclusion provoked such outrage. But in 1939, when Hollywood endings were expected to provide emotional closure, Rhett's departure felt like a violation of an unwritten contract between filmmaker and audience. Number 10. Psycho, 1960. The Mother Who Never Was. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho revolutionized American cinema in numerous ways, from its marketing to its narrative structure. But nothing shocked 1960 audiences more than its ending, which featured not one but two controversial elements that violated viewer expectations. First came the revelation that Norman Bates's mother wasn't a separate character at all, but a split personality of Norman himself, who had been dressing in her clothes and speaking in her voice while committing murders. This twist was followed by a clinical psychiatric explanation of Norman's condition, delivered directly to the audience in an unusually explicit scene that feels more like a medical lecture than traditional narrative cinema. Both elements of this ending provoked intense audience backlash. The revelation about Norman's mother identity was considered by many to be not just shocking, but tasteless and exploitative. The psychiatric explanation was criticized as heavy-handed and unnecessary, a criticism Hitchcock himself later acknowledged might be valid. The first preview screening in New York was particularly contentious. According to Hitchcock's production assistant, nearly a quarter of the audience walked out during the film's final 10 minutes. Comment cards contained remarks like, "disgusting" and "amoral," and "I feel like I need to take a shower after that ending." Paramount executives were so concerned about the negative reactions that they considered re-editing the ending to make it less explicit about Norman's cross-dressing and matricide. Hitchcock refused, threatening to take the film to another studio if any changes were made. The controversy extended beyond the theater. Several prominent psychiatrists publicly criticized the film's portrayal of mental illness as inaccurate and potentially harmful. The Catholic Legion of Decency condemned the ending as morally objectionable due to its perverted content. What's remarkable about Psycho is how quickly audience perception shifted. The very elements that provoked disgust in 1960, the mother twist and the psychiatric explanation, are now considered iconic moments in cinema history. The film that many initial viewers found repulsive is now celebrated as a masterpiece, with its ending routinely taught in film schools as a model of psychological horror. As Hitchcock biographer Donald Spoto noted, audiences weren't ready for Psycho in 1960, but rather than adjusting the film to suit the audience, Hitchcock forced the audience to catch up to the film, and eventually they did. Number 11. Freaks, 1932. The Revenge That Went Too Far.
How she got that way will never be known. Some say a jealous lover. Others that it was the code of the freak.
Todd Browning's Freaks follows the story of a beautiful trapeze artist who marries a sideshow performer for his inheritance, planning to poison him after the wedding. When the other carnival performers, all played by people with real physical abnormalities, discover her plot, they take horrific revenge, mutilating her into a human duck in the film's final sequence. The original ending was even more explicit, showing the trapeze artist quacking in the mud as spectators recoil in horror. After catastrophic test screenings, MGM cut nearly 30 minutes from the film and slightly softened the ending, though it remained deeply disturbing. Even in its edited form, Freaks provoked perhaps the most extreme audience reaction in Hollywood history. At the initial preview in San Diego, a woman reportedly screamed and ran from the theater during the finale. Another viewer threatened to sue MGM, claiming the film had caused her to suffer a miscarriage from shock. The public and critical response was so negative that MGM withdrew the film from circulation after only a brief release. Freaks effectively ended Browning's career as a major director and was banned in several countries, including the UK, where it remained prohibited for 30 years. What made the ending of Freaks so disturbing to 1932 audiences wasn't just its graphic nature, but its moral ambiguity. The film positions the physically deformed characters as the heroes and the beautiful trapeze artist as the villain, inverting traditional Hollywood values. When the freaks take their revenge, the audience is placed in the uncomfortable position of either sympathizing with a brutal mutilation or rejecting the film's protagonists. This moral complexity, combined with the use of real sideshow performers rather than actors in makeup, created an ending that Depression-era audiences simply couldn't process. As one contemporary reviewer wrote, "The most horrifying thing about Freaks is that it forces us to question who the monsters really are." The film remained virtually unseen for decades until it was rediscovered by the counterculture in the 1960s. Today, Freaks is recognized as a groundbreaking work that challenged social attitudes toward disability and physical difference. The ending that once provoked walkouts and fainting spells is now analyzed in academic papers as a radical critique of conventional beauty standards and exploitation. As film historian David J. Skell observed, audiences in 1932 weren't rejecting Freaks because it was poorly made, but because it forced them to confront prejudices they weren't ready to acknowledge. Number 12, Kiss Me Deadly, 1955, The Apocalyptic Box. Robert Aldrich's film noir classic follows hard-boiled detective Mike Hammer as he investigates a case involving a mysterious box that various criminal factions are desperate to obtain. In the film's final sequence, the contents of the box are revealed to be some form of nuclear material that, when the box is opened fully, creates a massive explosion implied to be the beginning of a nuclear apocalypse. The final image shows the film's two surviving characters embracing in the ocean as a massive fireball consumes the beach house behind them, with the strong suggestion that this destruction will spread to engulf the world. This nihilistic ending stunned 1955 audiences, who were already anxious about the very real threat of nuclear annihilation during the height of Cold War tensions. Rather than providing the closure typical of detective films, Kiss Me Deadly concludes with the ultimate anti-resolution, the apparent end of civilization. At preview screenings, audience members reportedly shouted in disbelief during the final sequence. One infamous audience comment card simply read, "Who the hell wants to see the end of the world after watching a detective movie?" United Artists executives were so concerned about the reaction that they pressured Aldrich to shoot an alternative ending where the explosion is contained and the main characters survive unambiguously. Aldrich created this version but fought successfully to have his original ending released in most markets. Critics were divided, with many dismissing the conclusion as exploitation of nuclear fears or pretentious art house posturing. Time magazine called it a ludicrous and offensive attempt to elevate a pulp story to political commentary. The controversy surrounding Kiss Me Deadly was intensified by its timing. Released the same year that the Civil Defense Administration began its duck and cover campaign in schools, the film seemed to suggest that such preparations were futile, that nuclear destruction, once initiated, would be absolute and inescapable. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of this case is that for decades, many viewers never saw Aldrich's intended ending at all. For the film's television release, United Artists substituted the alternative conclusion where the explosion remains contained. It wasn't until the 1990s that the original apocalyptic ending was fully restored, allowing modern audiences to experience the conclusion that had so disturbed viewers in 1955. Film noir historian Eddie Muller has suggested that the ending of Kiss Me Deadly represents the logical conclusion of the genre. After a decade of films showing a corrupt, venal society, where did noir have left to go except total destruction? These controversial endings reveal something fascinating about the relationship between filmmakers and audiences. In each case, directors deliberately violated viewers' expectations about how stories should conclude, provoking reactions that ranged from confusion to outrage. Yet almost every film on this list is now considered a classic, with their once controversial endings celebrated as bold artistic choices. What does this tell us about how cinema evolves? Perhaps that the endings that disturb us most are often the ones that stay with us longest, challenging our assumptions, expanding our emotional range, and ultimately changing how we experience stories. The next time you watch a film with an ending that leaves you unsettled or angry, remember the history of these controversial conclusions. Today's outrageous ending might be tomorrow's recognized masterpiece. Sometimes, the most valuable cinematic experiences aren't the ones that give us what we want, but the ones that give us what we didn't know we needed. What movie ending shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey through Hollywood's most controversial conclusions, please hit like, subscribe, and the notification bell to catch our next exploration of cinema history. Until next time, remember that in the greatest films, the real story often begins after the end.